This is Algebra 1, Unit 9, Lesson 6 on the quadratic formula. Now, the quadratic formula is a formula derived from completing the square that can be used to find the roots of any quadratic equation. So what somebody did is they took their quadratic equation, ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0, and applied completing the square to it and came up with this formula. The nice thing about this formula is it can be used for any quadratic equation, and you can find the zeros for it. So it's a really simple formula once you figure out what the a, b's, and c's stand for. Now remember, ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. You start out, it has to equal 0, which this equation does. All right, now your a, b, and c value are the terms in front of the x squared, the x, and the c. So if I look at this equation, x squared plus 8x plus 3 equals 0, in front of the x squared is actually a 1. So my a value is going to be 1. This is a. My b value is in front of the x. Here's bx, so this is going to be your b, is going to be 8, and c is going to be 3. Okay, so we want to solve this equation using this a, this b, and this c. All we have to do is plug in the values. So x equals, because we're looking for the zeros, negative b. Well, b is 8, so negative b would be negative 8. Plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac. Well, let's see, b squared would be 8 squared minus 4 times a is 1 times c is 3. All over 2a, so that would be 2 times 1. Okay, now the nice thing about this too is my calculator can do a lot of the work. All right, so this is going to be negative 8 plus or minus. I'm going to put my square root here. I'm going to put this entire thing under the square root in my calculator. So, parenthesis, 8 squared minus 4 times 1 times 3, because I want the number under the square root. So all this that I just wrote on my paper, I'm going to put in my calculator. So that comes out to be 52. So under the square root here is 52. All over 2. Okay, now I need to put the square root of 52 in simplest radical form. All right, so I need a perfect square that goes into 52. Well, I know that 52 is 4 times 13, which is 2 times the square root of 13. So this is going to be negative 8 plus or minus 2 times the square root of 13 all over 2. Okay, now suppose I didn't know that it was 4 times 13. I can use my calculator to help me figure that out. So if I do the square root of 52 divided by x, put that in my calculator, and go to my table, and I want to find the one that is closest to 0 that comes out evenly. All right, so if I go down here, 13 and 2, remember that this is the outside term, and this is the inside. So the square root of 52 is equal to 2 times the square root of 13. So we can do it that way too if you're not good with the square roots. All right, so if I want to continue on with my values here, I want to finish this up. So this is going to be x equals. Now this 2 will divide both the negative 8 and the 2. So I'm going to divide it as fractions like this. Negative 8 over 2 plus or minus 2 square root of 13 over 2. Negative 8 divided by 2 is negative 4 plus or minus 2 divided by 2 is 1 times the square root of 13. So my roots are negative 4 plus or minus the square root of 13. So there's actually 2 answers here. X equals negative 4 plus the square root of 13, and x equals negative 4 minus the square root of 13. So we just write it as one actual thing. So plus or minus is fine. So basically, it's just get the equation equal to 0, pick out your a, b, and c, plug them in the formula, and solve. Now, just to show you that you can do this by completing the square too, let's do that quickly. Subtract the 3. We get x squared plus 8x equals negative 3. Take half the b value and square it and add it to both sides. So half the b value would be 4 squared, and I'm going to add it to both sides, which is 16. So negative 3 plus 16 on both sides. And then you want to factor this, and we know the factors are going to be whatever the half was. So this is going to be x plus 4 quantity squared Negative 3 plus 16 is 13. Okay, so finishing the square root, we want to take the square root of both sides, and don't forget it's plus or minus. So this is going to be x plus 4 because the square root cancels out the square, equals plus or minus the square root of 13, and then move the 4 over. So we got the same answer, negative 4 plus or minus the square root of 13. Okay, so that is doing it by the quadratic formula completing the square. I got the same answer, so you can do it the same way. All right, now you can also do this by the quadratic formula with factorable ones. So if I do 2x squared minus 9x plus 4 equals 0, first of all, it's equal to 0. I want to factor this. Now, can I divide this by 2? No, I can't because 9 doesn't divide by 2. So I have to do my little box. Here's my box. All right, and remember 2x squared goes here, 4 goes here. I want to multiply them together is 8x squared. All right, now since this is plus, that means the signs are the same, so it's going to be minus minus because the middle term is minus. So I know this has to be minus, this has to be minus. So I need the factors of 8 to add up to negative 9. Well, that would have to be negative 8 and negative 1. So I put those in here, negative 8x, negative 1x, and take my GCF up and down. So GCF here is 2x. This one's going to be x. That gives me 2x squared. Across the bottom here is going to be 4, and across the up and down here is going to be 1. So my factors are 2x minus 1, x minus 4 equals 0. Set each bubble equal to 0, and solve for x. So add 1, and divide by 2, so x is equal to 1/2. There's 1 0, my other 0, add the 4, and you get x equals 4. So there's my two answers. So factoring is usually pretty quick. That's not a problem. But we can also do this by the quadratic formula. We just have to know what a, b, and c are. So a in this case is on the x squared, is 2. B is going to be negative 9. Make sure you take the sign with it. C is going to be 4. All right, so our formula is x equals negative b. Well, if b is already negative, that's going to make it positive 9. Plus or minus the square root of b squared, negative 9 squared, minus 4 times a, which is 2, times c, which is 4, all over 2a, which would be 2 times 2. Whoops, positive 9. All right, so putting this in my calculator, very important. When I do the square root of negative 9, put it in parentheses or it won't square the negative. It'll give you the wrong answer. All right, so it's the square root, or negative 9 squared minus 4 times a is 2 times c is 4. And that gives me 49. All over 4. All right, what is the square root of 49? Well, that's 7. So it's 9 plus or minus 7 over 4. All right, so that gives me two answers. 9 plus 7 over 4 and 9 minus 7 over 4. All right, so 9 and 7 is 16 over 4, which is equal to 4. Oh, did we get that over here? And then 9 minus 7 is 2 over 4, and 2 over 4 is 1/2. So you can get it by factoring, or you can use the quadratic formula. So the nice thing about the quadratic formula, it can be used anytime on any quadratic. The only thing is, usually factoring is faster. So if you do factoring first, then see if you can't do factoring, try the quadratic formula, and usually completing the square is the last way to do it. Okay, so the quadratic formula is most commonly used when the solutions are irrational numbers that can't be found by factoring. So usually when you can't factor, use the quadratic formula. In this, we have to know what a, b, and c are in this problem. Make sure this is equal to 0. A is 1, b is 6, c is negative 9. All right, so our equation again is x equals negative b would be negative 6 plus or minus the square root of b squared, 6 squared, minus 4 times a is 1 times c is negative 9, all over 2 times 1. So this is negative 6 plus or minus 6 squared minus 4 times 1 times 9, negative 9. And when I multiply all that out, comes out to be 72. So it's negative 6 plus or minus the square root of 72 over 2. Now I need to simplify the square root of 72. All right, well, I know it's 36 times 2. So it's going to be 6 radical 2. But if I didn't know that, I go to y equals, and then I just change this to 72 divided by x, go to your table, find the one that is closest to 0, that comes out evenly, so it'd be 6 radical 2. Okay, just a quick tip there. So it's negative 6 plus or minus 6 times the square root of 2 over 2, and then divide both the terms out front by 2. And this will be x equals negative 3 plus or minus 3 radical 2. So there we go. We got it. Okay, one more. What's my a value? A is 3, b is 4, c is negative 1. All right, my formula, x equals negative b is negative 4, plus or minus the square root of b squared, 4 squared, minus 4 times 3 times negative 1, all over 2 times 3. So x equals negative 4 plus or minus 4 squared minus 4 times 3 times negative 1 works out to be 28 over 6. All right, now I know 28 is 4 times 7, so this is going to be 2 times the square root of 7, all over 6. Now I can divide both of these terms by 2 and or just split them into fractions. I like to do it with fractions. Okay, so negative 4 over 6 is negative 2/3 plus or minus 1/3 square root of 7. Now some people like to leave it as one whole thing. If you do that, just divide each of these terms by 2. It's also equivalent to negative 2 plus or minus the square root of 7 over 3. These are equivalent, so you could do it that way as well. Just divide the 2 out on all 3 of the terms. Okay. So when we're doing application problems, it makes greater sense to express answers if they're rationals approximated decimal. We usually calculate with decimals, not with square roots. So we want to round to the place that is asked for. So a projectile is fired vertically from the top of a 60-foot tall building. Its height in feet above the ground after t seconds is given by this formula. So using your calculator, sketch a graph of the projectile's height using the indicated window. Now I already set my calculator to the right window 0 to 3 for the x's and 0 to 70 for the y's. There we go. And then my y equals, I just used x in my values, and when I graph this, it looks like this. So it starts up, and then it comes down somewhere between 2 and 3 seconds, it hits the ground. So it starts at 60, I know that because this is my c value. It goes up, and then it comes down somewhere over here. So I want to know what time does the ball hit the ground. I want to know what this value is right here. So if this is an equation, we have to know what h is. If we're on the ground, h is going to equal 0. So if I set this equal to 0, plus 20t plus 60 is equal to 0, I can use the quadratic formula immediately. I don't have to worry about factoring or anything like that. So my a is going to be negative 16, b is 20, c is 60. So my equation is x equals negative b, negative 20, plus or minus the square root of b squared, which is 20 squared, minus 4 times a is negative 16, times c is 60, all over 2 times negative 16. All right, now I already put this in my calculator. Under the square root comes out to be 4240, all over negative 32. All right, so I actually have 2 answers here. Negative 20 plus the square root of 4240 over negative 32, and negative 20 minus square root of 4240 over negative 32. All right, I can put those in my calculator using my alpha key. Negative 20 plus the square root of 4240 over negative 32, and I get that answer. And then I can go up and grab it and change the plus to a minus. So I just arrow up till I get to where I want to be. So this would be minus. So I get negative 2.7 and negative 1.4 are my 2 answers. So this is negative 1.4, This is 2.7, so I want the positive answer, so it's going to be this one. Okay, so that is the quadratic formula. So we're going to be practicing this on your homework.